Put me on this.
We are locked in, you are locked on. We are live, and this is Misaligned. Welcome to another episode of your favorite conversational chat, discourse, interaction, where we talk about a few different topics where people want to talk about, but maybe they just don't do to the same level of discourse that we do. Education is supposed to be the great equalizer. But here's a real question, though. Is it teaching people to think or just to obey? From classrooms built by colonizers to curricula that barely touch their own history, tonight we're asking whether education in Africa as well is empowerment or is it indoctrination? And if we start from scratch, what would a true African education look like? Yemi, take us through. Have we lost Yemi?
No,
There we go.
I'm here.
There we go.
I didn't kind of hear some of your last words. I think there's a bit of background sort of crackling noises there, but that appears to have settled now. Yeah. Well, what's education really for? And I suppose one of how we can begin to think about this after I've said, welcome to everyone who's joined us. Welcome, Cross and Farouk. I gather Job's running late and should be with us at some point. What is education? Seems to me that we're probably kind of focusing on formal education when we ask that question, but I suppose we're welcome to kind of broaden the scope. But is it empowerment or indoctrination? Does it even make sense to draw that dichotomy? Does it teach critical thinking, or does it sort of condition people to conform? Has it got a role in cohesion, community cohesion, particularly in parts of the world such as Africa? Farouk, what do you say?
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure joining the Misaligned team again today, and thanks to everyone out there. I think education is everything that has been laid out by Cross and by Yemi. It's designed to build, to shape, to give purpose. It's designed to make us think in a certain way and malleable and obedient, to make us model citizens. It is designed to indoctrinate, to educate. Yemi hinted on that. Is there even a need to ask if it indoctrinates or educates? What's indoctrination? What's education? Do we even need to ask if it's meant to make us think or to obey? I think it's everything. So as my opening gambit, the questions asked are, it's everything that has been suggested. And I'll join Yemi to ask, what's the point differentiating from it? And then I hope further down the conversation, we'll go to why, different types, and how we should take advantage of, say, an educational system. And by system, I mean a series of institutions and stages and frameworks through which citizens, members of the society or community, are educated, indoctrinated, if you like, made to obey, if you like, made and shaped into model citizens, if you like, from birth to death, formally, informally, in a range of skills: technical, artisan, to philosophy, to thinking, to science, to astronomy. I hope we'll get to that part in this conversation where we talk about how it can be a utility, how indoctrinating everyone and shaping everyone and giving it can be useful. I'll hold off here for now and allow that to talk.
Great, thank you. That's a very thought-provoking introduction. Cross, do you agree that we need to be indoctrinated, or do you make the dichotomy between indoctrination and empowerment? And if yes, do you agree that there's a need for people to be indoctrinated in large groups? In that sense,
I think it's an interesting concept when we start thinking about society as a whole. So education as it stands, when you separate it from individual outcomes, I would say that education is probably one of the worst things that you could create as a system for individuals, because it creates a system of indoctrination that is only outperformed by religion, because religion requires you to accept things outside logical and evidential circumstance. With education, you're required to focus on the things that have been decided that are logical, quote unquote, facts. I'll give you an example. So within the world or the universe that we're existing at the moment, there's a classification of the universe where matter, which is just the stuff that we understand as it is right now, accounts for 5% of the universe, according to the scientists. And then there's somewhere around 67% of everything that's accounted for by something called dark energy. By dark energy, they mean it's a force that is making all the objects or making space-time separate faster than light to move in the directions against general relativity or special relativity. Essentially, physics doesn't make sense. So there's something that is accounted for 70% of the things that we don't understand. And there's dark matter, which is basically talking about the fact that all the galaxies and all the different things that exist within the universe are operating in a way that we don't expect them to do. So we need to assign matter to them that we don't see. So the stars all spin across all of these black holes, and they're spinning the velocity that they've got, etc. All these kind of things. And when you look at these things, we're saying suspend any logic. We're going to put that the universe that you see, when you open your window, open your curtains, and you open that window and you look outside, we're saying we don't know what's going on in 95% of the universe, the world that we're looking at. But we're supposed to accept that as fact. And I've always wondered about this, in that we've looked at science, and science has been wrong and almost an incalculable number of times. And science is the determination of education, quote unquote. We say that we're educating people based on things we know. We have curricula that say you should know a thing. This is a thing, and we teach our children from youth, from their infancy, about what the world is, and we don't even know what it is. I don't think it's empowerment by a long stretch. I think to a large extent, a lot of the things that we do is indoctrinating society to make sure people behave the way we want them to behave, with the knowledge that we want them to have, in order to ensure that we have conformity and consistency in behaviors, in outcomes, in outputs, and in focus areas. It's very similar to the economic debate that we've had, but it's a bit different in that rather than focusing on the economic output, it's still the same concept, but we're focusing on the scientific output. Generally speaking, when it comes to education, we say people should do the things that we think they should do, and if they don't do them, they're uneducated. And I disagree with that concept. I have a problem with it. That's my take.
That's fascinating, and I suspect that there will be points of misalignment very quickly on this one. For one, I think you and I probably have are misaligned on what education is in a sort of fundamental sense, and the role of science in it, which might be a slight digression, but I still think it's worth kind of just saying something very quickly about that. That you mentioned about people being taught that what we can see isn't everything. What should we teach them? Should we tell them lies? Should we tell them that what we can see is everything, when we in fact know, in the way that you've explained that, because what we can see doesn't seem to account for all of the phenomena that we've observed, so that we know by inference that there must be something that we're missing, and that thing that we're missing, we can make calculations that account for them, and so we can account for it mathematically, even if we cannot account for it sort of in a sort of tangible sense. What is wrong in laying all the cards on the table in that sense? Are we
There are many
supposed to
things wrong with it.
are we supposed to
So
pretend that we can see what we can't see?
I
the,
do
the
I do
very
also want to push
there are many things wrong with
Cross.
it. Yeah.
Cross, before this becomes a back and forth between you and Yemi, let me join the fight, so it will be 2 against 1, because I'm also misaligned. so that you
According to
understand
science, it's most of
you understand what's coming for you. I think very interesting take there, Cross. I think I think part of what you've done there is a critique of science rather than education.
correct.
A critique of the unknown rather than education.
As a first level, but
Yes.
the result.
So I think the wider conversation is education as a whole. Science itself, it's a set of tools. It's a framework for exploring known and unknown. There are other frameworks. There is philosophy. There are other frameworks for exploring the 95% you go on as saying unknown. But science is just a set of tools. You observe, you experiment, you check for biases, you accept when you are wrong. You do that over and over and over again, and you accept what is known and what is unknown. And that's science. In itself, it's a set of tools we use to look at our environment, look at knowledge, look at the unknown. And in that sense, it's okay that we don't know, just as Yemi has said. And what we know, we know. And this is now my personal opinion. It's a personal opinion. I think as a framework, it's probably the most reliable, reproducible, and framework that we have.
Probably.
I always like to reflect. I always like to reflect on certainty. That helps us.
I think
that helps us in debate. But the idea that you observe, you theorize, you experiment, you seek proof, and you follow the evidence, not any preconceived ideas. I think that idea, that set of tools that science has given us and that we have refined over millennia, is the most powerful framework we have to understand our physical, social environment. So that said, I don't want to repeat what Yemi has said about the unknown. There's nothing wrong in not knowing. Forget about space. The oceans of the world, we don't know 5% of what lies beneath. I mean, forget about space. And also, there's nothing wrong in being wrong. You observe, you theorize, you experiment. The evidence says it's X. If you refine those processes and the evidence says it's Y tomorrow, that's the evidence. That's not being wrong. That's the evidence. And then you did talk about zombies and indoctrination. Again, that's a critique of certain types of education. There are forms of education that teaches you critical thinking, that teaches you to follow the evidence, that teaches you to question things. Those aspects of education, are not indoctrinating you. They're actually giving you tools to fight indoctrination, to challenge indoctrination. There are aspects of education that makes you obey. You join the military, top down. You're going to the battle, you must obey command. That form of education will be tailored for that. So when we talk about education, we should understand that it's different things. It's informal, it's formal, it's in classroom, it's outside classroom, it's on the streets. And then hopefully, as I said later, we'll go into that point where we talk about how a nation, how a people, how Black people can harness its potentials to build, to shape, to give order and to unify. So, Cross, you have the right of reply now.
I think there's a couple of things there. In that, one, I don't necessarily agree that the scientific method is the best method of dealing with things. And the scientific method basically follows around observation, hypothesis, experimentation, analyze results, isn't it? Something like that. So it's just basically looking through what happens. You see what happens, you test it, you review, and then you make sure what it is that's happened. It's almost a caveman's equivalent of saying, I've got fire, start fire, fire, burn, touch, hand, it's hot, we stop, fire, hot, bad, terrible thing. The results of what...
That's what it is, but it's still pretty powerful. That's what it is.
I'm not saying that it's not powerful.
But it's still pretty powerful.
It's the reason why we are where we are right now. If we didn't do that, we won't be able to have all the things, all the amenities that we have now as a society. But I'm saying that is not the best system in place because of the shortfalls.
What's the best? Inspiration by the Holy Spirit?
Okay, well, definitely not that. Because
so you tell us what's the best? What's better than science? Inspiration?
So I think something that could usurp science, because we're almost crossing into a different boundary here with the conversation between science and education, because it's two separate things.
Which Baruch pointed out. So let's not spend too long on that, but just say what you need to say.
So in terms of what we should be really looking at when it comes to education, we should be educating based off of irrefutable facts. Now, the reason why I brought that specific thing about dark matter, dark energy, etc., is that it is something that we don't have evidence for, and we're hypothesizing. We're saying that we think there is something in this area.
But that is an irrefutable fact. So the fact that you're saying don't know is an irrefutable fact.
No, but we're not saying we don't know. No, but we're not saying we don't know. We're saying that 5% of the universe is matter, and this is education. 5% of the universe is matter.
That we know. The universe that we know. Observable universe.
No. Well, observable versus the universe is it's a distinction without a difference when you look at the actual what those definitions are. It doesn't really matter because the universe is apparently flat. It doesn't make a difference. The issue that I've got is that if we're putting numbers on these things, we're giving facts to what these things are. And when it comes to science, this is the issue I've always had with science and education, that we put all these things. This is the issue that we had, actually, Yemi, in the previous conversation about economics and sociological sciences. There's quite a lot of things that are being ascribed as fact.
Economics is very good at trespassing on territories and ascribing facts that don't exist. But making assumptions and then turning those assumptions to or almost communicating them as facts. But I wanted to say something about
which is chemistry and physics.
Versus physics. Yes.
I'm talking about physics and chemistry. When I'm talking about the dark matter representation, etc., I'm talking about chemistry and physics. I'm talking about foundational, actual science.
So what I wanted to say.
But they're also wrong.
Okay.
Because they don't know what they're talking about, but
no,
they
they
were
do.
educating
No, they do.
people
But
and telling them.
I'll leave that to one side for now, just so that we don't get sidetracked. But so what I was going to comment on is come back to the dichotomy between indoctrination and critical thinking, and I actually don't think. I think the dichotomy between that again is artificial, and it's sort of it's almost kind of manufactured dichotomy. And I say that not because in practice you can't make some sort of helpful distinction, but what I am pointing towards is that you need both. And actually, my feeling is that foundational education should incorporate a lot of indoctrination. And people can't function without indoctrination. So you get born and you have a family, you love your siblings and your parents, and you're attached to the area that you grew up and your community. All of this is just indoctrination, but they're extremely helpful and useful. The fact that they are products of indoctrination doesn't make them bad. In fact, they are extremely helpful. As long as they don't get out of control, they can be very helpful. That sense of connection, of duty that you feel from, and education has a role to play in sort of cementing that and scaling it, from, say, family of 5 to, a community of 200,000, or a country of 20 million. Do you see what I'm saying? So,
What is the outcome you're looking for? I think it depends on the outcome. What's the outcome?
So the outcome you're looking for from the sort of indoctrination part of education, and I'm coming to the critical thinking in a minute, but the sort of indoctrination part of education, which I think, they're all kind of mismatched into one, but I'm just making that distinction for the purpose of argument, is that you're aiming for sort of communication of shared understanding of where we're at, where we're from, where we're at, where we hope to be driving towards, and how we aim to do that, right? And a lot of this stuff is indoctrination. I mean, that's just what it is. Doesn't make it bad. As long as it doesn't get out of hand, doesn't make it bad. In fact, it's extremely necessary to galvanize people, Yeah, and you see countries that are very successful, you can see an element of that.
So, Yemi, thanks for taking us down this path. As I hinted earlier, I said I'd hope that we take the conversation into this aspect, and I'd share a framework with us. Let's consider the family as a unit of society. Let's look at community, and then look at the state or the nation, and how it's crucial and fundamental, how crucial and fundamental indoctrination is. We're all parents. What do I tell my boys at home? Love each other. You're a family. You share. You take turns. No fighting.
In other words, you're indoctrinating them.
I'm indoctrinating them. We love each other. We love God. We love our neighbors. You have a duty to not to harm each other. That's indoctrination. What does that do for me and my boys? It gives us shared values, shared aspirations, shared goals. And hopefully I am therefore in that unit of society, I'm transmitting values that I hope they will have after I'm gone. I'm educating them. That's informally. What then happens in the village square? In my village, or in the community I grew up in Makurdi, Abuja, Nigeria, we had codes of conduct. There were proverbs about how we conduct ourselves within the estate, within society, as a tribe, as a people. It's all indoctrination. It's not about facts. It's about values and aspirations. So then we go to the national level. We are over 300 tribes in Nigeria, for example. We are coming from different perspectives, from, say, 100 million households, 220 million of us, and then you want all of us to, in a sense, as we do in my home and as my community, you want us as Nigerians or as Black people to have shared goals, shared values, shared aspirations that makes us to then have what we call social consensus, to pay tax, to contribute to shared security, shared prosperity, shared defense, you have to indoctrinate that population. And that's where that aspect, where education is indoctrination, is crucial, is fundamental. And again, taking this even further, some of the most successful revolutions that's happened in history incorporated cultural revolutions, because the revolutionaries understood that they needed to control the minds of the citizen to harness that unified consensus and will to deliver on whatever. That's why socialists, communists, capitalists, ideologues expend so much on propaganda. It's a form of education. So much on the educational budget, so much on the media, because you need to forge this unified identity, this unified consensus, to then deliver on shared aspiration and goals. So it's crucial, it's fundamental, and in my view, there's no point denying it. In my home, there is indoctrination, there is critical thought, there is science to give the kids the framework to engage with the world, and then to forge a unified home and say, this is our family, these are our values, these are our aspirations. And I think there is no point denying it, and there's no point differentiating it. At family, communal, and national level, even at subcontinental level, we need education to forge that required consensus to then pursue our shared goals.
Thanks, Farouk. If I take the opportunity to welcome Jab, we've missed you the first 25 minutes, and we're just talking about education and whether there's a dichotomy in how we see education, empowerment versus indoctrination, for critical thinking versus conformity, and how we can harness whatever we think of education for the betterment of Africa. And I think there's just been misalignment straight off with. So I'll just get to part of that, and then we'll bring you in shortly. But I don't think Cross is very pleased about this idea that there is necessary indoctrination. So yeah, let's have to push back against that if you want.
Yeah, because for me, I think we need to. I like defining words.
Yeah.
And indoctrination is fundamentally the process of teaching a person to accept a set of beliefs uncritically, or without criticism, or without critique. This is my issue. Indoctrination is fine if the people, or if the concept of indoctrination required critical analysis of those beliefs being foisted upon those people. But when we're talking about a situation where people are not allowed to critique the beliefs being foisted upon them, we have a problem. That's precisely why I started off with the examples I used. I used the space examples because we're all going to look at that and think, oh, wow, that's a bit silly. Versus looking at other things that we look at currently right now within physics, within science, within physics, within chemistry, etc. That maybe not as much chemistry, but more within physics tends to be the biggest one. We've got loads of things that we look at right now that just don't make sense, but we just agree. I'm using the most insane things to talk about to explain the fact that we're uncritically accepting these concepts, and then we're accepting them to be true. My issue is that education can often lead to a system where there is no empowerment, because people are being indoctrinated to make decisions of false information that they don't understand. They do not understand how to utilize that information, and they cannot make informed decisions of these things. That's my challenge. I 100% think it's indoctrination, that people are being forced into a situation where they are making assumptions, making decisions, making declarative positions off of something that they don't understand.
Okay.
But they are doing that because they are indoctrinated.
So I'm just keen to bring Jab in because he's joined us a bit later on, and I'm just kind of itching to hear from him. So what I'll do very quickly is that I will make my best attempt to give a summary of what the areas of alignment has been and the areas of the misalignment, and then see what you kind of how you approach it. But I think what we've kind of almost agreed on as a group is that within our educational systems as we know it now, that there's a lot of indoctrination going on. And I think both Cross and Farouk and myself agree or are aligned about that. What we are misaligned on is whether or not there's a clear distinction between what indoctrination is and what sort of empowerment or critical thinking is. I argue that actually, you need all of it, and often what you get is a mismatch, and actually that in many cases, what you call indoctrination is not a bad thing, it's necessary. You have to foster a sense of oneness in the home and in the small community and scale it up through formal systems into a large community, where actually a lot of it is just, you just tell people a story and a thing.
Western values.
Yeah, so and I argue that that's necessary. It looks like Farouk is aligned on that. But Cross really isn't happy with that. He thinks, we should be all about facts, and education should be all about facts. Where do you stand, Jack?
Okay, so no, thank you, and I'm sorry that I'm late. I just traffic and all that kind of business. So first of all, I think I'm happy to hear that some people think that education can be seen as also a form of indoctrination. And I quote the last part of Farouk's point, and I think I completely agree with that. We often say that education starts at home, or charity starts at home, or begins at home, but education can also happen at home. Education can happen in the community. It's not just what happens in the classroom. And when you
just to add,
yeah,
within formal systems, education can actually start before you were born.
Yeah,
because the system educated your parents.
That's correct.
And they will then teach you what they've been taught.
Correct.
Sorry to correct.
I agree with that. So again, it is a system of value. So if we take, let's say, because often in the West here, we think that our model of education is the gold standard. This is how our society is on without indoctrination. That's how we paint it. And you look at North Koreans, how people are described. They talk about the North Korean dictatorship and people are being indoctrinated. They say the same thing about China. And so I'm going to take a very long route. I'll come back to answer that question. Let's take China, for instance. And when Chairman Mao was their leader, there was a period of, if I can call it, isolation, where the Chinese community just was completely closed off to the rest of the world, and it was just kind of them. And in that time, they were studying their history. They were talking about trying to reinforce their culture. They didn't want any of these foreign cultures, if you want to put it that way, or values.
In other words, they were being indoctrinated. Sorry to, I'm just.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Exactly. So yes. So they were being, indoctrinated, but those are their values, and those are their because you can argue that you cannot educate a Chinese child in the same way you educate, let's say, a Caucasian child. Or in the case of, let's say, Africa, for instance, I don't believe that because our needs are different. I feel that when you are educating an African child, it's going to be different to how you might educate somebody who lives in a country that is completely developed and so kind of digressing. So I think education there has to be cultural context to it. It's got to be it's got to be able to meet the needs of that particular society. Education has to be able to solve the problems of that particular society. So as a way of doing this, I can completely see why the Chinese may want to educate their children in a particular way, different to how we may do it, let's say, in England. And as like Farouk said, because your parents have been passed, we've said this on this podcast many, many times, when a child is born, it's with a caveat for Yemi, because I know you're going to say no now, but with a caveat, when a child is born, it's a blank slate.
You're learning fast, Job.
Yes,
Get your caveats in early.
yes. So it's a blank slate. By that, what I'm meaning is that that child is not born into a vacuum, but they have come on as a blank slate. Just accept that with that caveat. So therefore, whatever that child learns is actually just it's a
It's
you can
whatever
call
you
it
put in.
if you want. Yes. So that is going to be there's going to be a period of acculturation where that child absorbs everything within that society, both things that you can touch and feel and those that are imperceptible. So I see education therefore in that context. It's 360. It's a global thing. It's holistic. It's not just what you learn in
It's not just giving facts. Cross, and I know you tend to be quite interested in this sort of things. Thanks very much, Jab. I think again very comprehensive, and it seems like I'm going back to Cross because it seems like you're the one who's got the right of reply here. But the challenge I'll put to you is the famous idea by David Hume, the philosopher, that you cannot derive an is from an ought, and that I think that's the territory we're in now. And knowledge and ideas and everything in life is you can make that again. You can make that. It's not a clear distinction, but often you can draw a line between what is and what ought to be, right? And I think the mistake you're probably making here is that you're putting all of your attention in what is, when in fact life is a mixture of what is and what ought to be. So we don't, in fact, most of the biggest decisions that people make in life is about what ought to be. So not what is, what should I do? Who should I be friends with? What business should I do? These are no facts. These are, there's a mismatch of facts and values. And what David Hume was saying there is you cannot derive those from facts. And what tends to happen is this oughts, they're basically taught, right? They're value systems. They are taught, at the level of individual relationships, families, institutions, societies. And that necessarily has to be a part of education because there's no getting away from it. We can't get away from the oughts. Again, that's just me putting more pressure on your position.
No, I mean,
as if we haven't put enough pressure on it.
You've not, because my position is quite clear. So for example, something happened fairly recently, and this is my personal view. I'm just saying to absolve everybody else of their own involvement in my personal opinion about this. But fairly recently, there was a nursery in America that someone's son had his nails get painted at the nursery. Pink nails were painted, and the grandmother came and she made a bit of a furore about it, and she was a bit upset. She was complaining. She wasn't necessarily satisfied or happy about the situation and the outcome. And for me, this is part of the educational aspect about it, where we've got situations where education is crossing over from the things that are scientifically backed and are very factual or very fixed to the point where it's more about what it is that's trendy or what it is that's currently socially acceptable. And we're crossing the boundary about what it is that is and this is my own personal, and you just reiterate that fact that this is my opinion.
Cross. I think you need to zoom out. I think your framework again is focusing on a type of education, whereas the conversation, so the conversation is about education as a whole. You're veering towards facts, whereas when you look at education as a whole, I think it's science and the quantitative science that bear on fact. We have religious education, we have philosophy, we have yoga, we have anthropology, we have sports, we have art, we have crafts, we have fine art. So I think you're focusing on a critique of a type
I'm not.
of
So
certain
I can,
types of
I
education
can help us.
rather than
I'm not.
education as a whole.
I'm not, and I'll
Bear
tell
with me,
you
guys.
why.
Bear with me, guys. I can help us move this forward because we're already beginning to kind of transition. But in order to kind of crystallize your thoughts better, Cross, maybe let's get practical now. So, this is Africa. You're in charge. You've got a blank slate, as we would hope. What should we be teaching? How should we approach education to our young ones? Should we just be telling them facts, or should we be telling them some more?
Traditionalism. So I'm one of the most traditionalists, even though more often than not, I don't strike most people as being traditionalists because I take aspects of more postmodernist beliefs, behaviors, views, etc. I think traditionalism is key. We need to get our kids, the next generation, to focus on traditional ways of living. What
But those
are
are
the
not
views?
facts.
Sorry?
Those are not facts.
Not necessarily. It's not based on facts at all.
Okay.
Okay.
For example, for example, a man should if a man is crossing over to relationships, but it's a bit of a segue. If a man is in a relationship and is dating, he should pay for the first date, the first time he meets a girl. That doesn't have anything to do with facts. It's just what it is. If there's a fight or any kind of situation that's happening, again, man, woman, the man should step up and fight if necessary. This doesn't have anything to do with facts. There's nothing that has to do with that. A woman should ideally focus on having a family and raising kids, and she should be the one that transitions culture from generation to generation.
So you think education should teach culture, values, and norms, broadly
and
speaking,
tradition. I think
to
education
indoctrinate Africans. That's essentially. Can I stretch it that far? That's indoctrination, because you're teaching beliefs. You think the men should pay, the women should bear children. You want to use the system and public funding to enforce that. That's indoctrination, Cross.
No. There's only one.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just trying to help us clarify our thoughts here.
You can't checkmate me like that. Oh, come on, I'm ready for it. It's one word that matters.
But can I say this, Cross?
Wait, before you checkmate me, I'm not gonna, you can't checkmate me, I just switch. No. The word that matters is uncritically. You have to be able to critically. Yes, indoctrination requires your acceptance of these views and beliefs.
So when people push back, when people push back against your idea of a man paying for the date, when people push back against it, what are you going to do?
Then that's no longer indoctrination.
Okay, so as long as they can say no.
Yami, let me make it easier for him. So in your hypothetical clean slate, and you're making this policy, you're using government funding to set up primary schools and secondary schools to teach minors below the age of consent your values and your beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the tools to critically reject what you teach them in nursery, the songs about how great your ancestors are. They don't have that skill set yet you are teaching them. They don't have the capacity to refuse, yet you've put public funding into it. That's the definition of indoctrination.
So indoctrination has different levels.
Come back, and I just further Farouk's point here. Let's take England. I don't know whether you schooled here, but you can go to right up to maybe university and still not learn about the empire, the extent of it. So the history is told from one point of view. It's not complete. So
using your taxes and my taxes to our kids without their consent.
Yes, because when you say facts,
that's indoctrination.
It's very problematic because you're teaching history from a perspective. Because if you ask the Indians to write that history, they are going to give you a different perspective, right? Yeah. If you ask Africans who, were victims of empire, they are going to give you a different perspective. So who is the one that's got the facts then? And if you look at science, for instance, you mentioned science, even who funds the research, who determines what is to be researched. You know, all of these things they're not black and white facts like you're talking about. It's all centered again around people's values and what people decide should be priority and not, right? So it's very problematic when you say to teach facts, because
or for people to push back. When we talk
Yes.
about the educational system for societies, you're talking about people you take into the system at the age of 2, 3, 4 through kid centers and kid zones, and then get into primary school at the age of 5, 6, and teach them to think in a certain way, even before they become competent adults. That's indoctrination.
Or specific things like how you cross the road. And then so when a 7-year-old says, no, I don't agree with this way of crossing the road, what do? You just indoctrinate them some more. That's how we do it.
That's how you do it.
What do you mean?
There is no agency. And back to your beginning.
What do you do when a 7-year-old pushes back against the norms of how to cross the road?
And Cross, that takes you back to what you said at the beginning. Is education meant to help us think or to obey? It's both.
Yeah, empowerment
my kids in primary school are told, use the zebra line, use left, look left, when it's red, go. They don't question that. They are not educated to question that. They're educated to obey that.
No, but my point is they should question it. The issue I've got, like, so you're focusing on your but hold on. The issue I've got with this is that you're looking at your specific indoctrination, mechanism and method, and assuming that because yours works, that others are doing the same thing and it's working.
What I'm precisely saying. What I'm saying. No, you're quoting me. You're quoting me. What I am saying.
No, wait. Let me explain what I'm saying. The issue I've got, and this is something I've seen, and I talk about this to most people, is that I've seen loads of people trying to cross the road when the light is green for pedestrians, and they don't look. They're indoctrinated to think they can't look. We know the Nigerian aspect. You don't cross the road because the light is green for pedestrians. You're going to get run over by a pepper na pep.
So,
hold on. The issue I've got with this is that we apply this in only the context that work for us. We don't think about the other contexts that are dangerous and that kill people. The idea about the fact that we've got.
Cross, you're getting.
Farouk, let him finish. Farouk.
We've got people who walk across, and I've seen this multiple times. They don't even look. The light has turned green for them. They don't care. They don't look left or right. And they don't care whether there's somebody that's walking, that's driving, that doesn't care in a high-powered 16-valve, whatever car it is, that's just blasting through and run them over. They don't look at you.
That's just stupid.
They're indoctrinated.
I don't think indoctrinated. No.
Where? Hold on. Let me finish. Their indoctrination is focused on the fact that they know that in this country, when the light turns green, you walk. It's indoctrination.
I don't agree.
What do you mean you don't? Okay, fine, go on.
Cross, again, I think you run into the same problems. I don't think anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, is arguing. I don't think we've gone into the argument of good or bad indoctrination. And I believe if we talk about that, we would all align that there is good or bad in indoctrination based on the values that are imposed.
It's all bad.
The point that is actually being made is that education, so step back from whether indoctrination is good or bad. Education necessarily includes indoctrination, teaching people to obey, teaching critical thought, teaching pushback, and giving skills to survive, to learn, to educate, and to integrate. That's what we're saying. I don't think anybody has gone further than that to say indoctrination is good or bad. I think we all recognize that it can be good, it can be bad, just like there can be good education and bad education. The wider point is that education necessarily, particularly at group level, and even as I gave example earlier, even at the family level, is part of education.
Yes, so and
it's necessarily part of it. It may be good or bad.
it doesn't even seem to me that you can have a functional society without a good amount of what is just brute indoctrination, right? So your society can't function at all. And I think Jab began to allude to that when he talked about some of the reforms or how China kind of turned the corner. And I see that. I see, I'm not saying that's the only way, that can be, but I see that in principle. So, I turn up for my driving lessons or my driving test. The driving instructor is just giving me brute sort of instructions about how to approach driving, or you're not going to make progress with this. End of. And there's no,
another very another very
no,
successful model, Yemi,
yeah.
is Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore.
Right. Okay. Tell us about it.
He basically took over the educational system to build a Singaporean identity. It's a multicultural city-state.
You
Being
have
torn
to
apart at the time his party came to power with ethnic tension and divides, the Malays, the Singaporeans, the ethnic Chinese. He used the educational system to build a Singaporean identity, indoctrinated society, and that's how he forged that unified identity and was able to then deliver on the goals and objectives of his party.
Yeah.
And anyone who effectively uses that, we can call it propaganda, we can call it indoctrination, that aspect of it can then hope to unify people to then
so I want to take
achieve.
us back to the original question, because I think we just kind of, and maybe Jab will take this up. So you are, again, this is Africa. You're in charge. You've been blessed to be in charge. What are you doing with the educational system? What's the next step, and the step after that, and after that?
Okay, so that is a really very good question. I think it's not just Nigeria. I am going to use Africa as a case in point. So, and obviously what I'm going to say is going to also reflect my values, because the question you asked me is, if I were to be in a place where I can influence education, how would I do it, essentially? Or we can frame the question that way. So earlier I said that I don't believe that an African child should be educated in the same way as, let's say, a child in the US or in the UK, because the challenges of those just completely different. We live in a completely different society. So I want to build an Africa that is strong. I want to promote the idea of Pan-Africanism, which is that African, there is no Nigerian solution, Ghanaian solution, South African solution to the problems that we see in Africa. There's a Pan-African solution. So I want to call it indoctrinate, but I want to educate the school children about the history of Africa from an African perspective, not a Eurocentric perspective, which is what we learn about in school. I want them to also understand how the world is structured as it is. So currently, we live in a global capitalist dictatorship. I want them to understand why that has been very bad for Africa, why that has benefited the core capitalist countries, and I want them to understand what neocolonialism has done to Africa, what it is, the various tools that have been used in putting Africa where it is. And then I want us then to start to look at a Pan-African vision of liberating Africa. And if I'm going to say it, I think we need Pan-African economic integration. We need, political integration. We need military integration. Like I've said on this podcast many times, you also need nuclear deterrence, because unfortunately, that is the only language that the world understands to protect any development that you have that you've achieved.
You're not going to be teaching that to 7-year-olds, are you?
I absolutely would, because they need to understand. They need to understand that, unfortunately, look, we're going to be coming from very much like Islam, which is don't, you know, if somebody, don't go looking for trouble. Or let me say the way Malcolm X might say it, which is that we are not going to cause any trouble. However, if you slap us, we bear the right to defend ourselves. So
Okay.
I really think that no.
I've got a challenge for you, Jab, because
Go on.
It seems to me that what we should be beginning with regards to, I agree, I sort of aligned with regards to the fact that, you know, there needs to be some form of indoctrination where you come in and sort of kind of present values that you hope to bring people along with you, which almost becomes a way of seeing the world.
Yes.
But my view is that sort of focus or the light should first be turned inwards. Okay, so we're starting from who are we, what you know, what's our history, what do we represent, rather than who's out there and how are they causing us problems. I just feel that
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that when you've got 5 minutes to put your thoughts out, it's difficult to come. But I wanted to emphasize these core values. I think that not understanding these things, because I once read a book by Chunwenzu, and he was the first person who started to say or espouse the idea that I have encountered, which is that Europe and America are not our friends; they're actually enemies. And he says it is striking, surprising, shocking that you'll find people who are educated in these places, Africans that is, who consider these people to be friends. And he went on to explain why he thinks these people are enemies. And slowly now we're starting to understand that actually the point he's making is true. And he said that, look, if you put a rope, snakes look like a rope, right? But you need to teach your child to distinguish between a snake and a rope, because if he goes messing around with a snake thinking it's a rope, he's going to be in trouble, if you see where I'm coming from. But I completely agree with you. You need to, because Africa has been presented as a continent with that history. Before I agree with you, I think you can do both things actually. You can chew gum and talk at the same time. We need to explain to our kids and make them understand that the history as presented in those books, because those books have to go, we have to rewrite our history from our own perspective. Actually, those works have already been done. We just need to adopt them. So you need to make people understand that we've got a history, a very rich history. Long before we were enslaved and colonized, we had a very rich history, and this is who we are, and this is where we're coming from. It's kind of what China's done with its own, population. But it's also very essential that you start to point out to them ways in which Africa has been undermined. The lack of unity, that's something that has been used over and over against us. But little trick.
I think you're kind of freezing up.
If I was in charge, that the curriculum reflects these values and these beliefs. So yes, I agree with you. We start from our inside, but we've got to look at the outside. When do you do it? My feeling is that you probably need to start early. The other day I was reflecting on this and I was thinking, do you know that 1 year that we do in National Youth Service, this is after people, for listeners who may not be aware, where you go to university and then when you finish university, you spend 1 year of national service. I thought that actually that might be a good way to cover this curriculum in a year and just make everybody attend, classes, chilled, relaxed, and they can discuss it. It's a pivotal point to do it. But I don't know whether that is early enough, because like we're talking indoctrination, you need to indoctrinate people from day one, and that's why religions do it, right? You don't wait until you're in your 20s before they introduce a religion to you. You start from the day you're born. That's how it goes. But of course, that is in addition to make Cross happy. That is in addition to all of your sciences, your biology and your biochemistry. We're not saying all of those things are still important and essential. I think also very important how we study geography. I think we need to make people aware of all the resources that are underneath us and mining. And that is something that we need to introduce to people quite early on. And just the benefit of having economic integration, because everything is all about economics. This is why they use sanctions. They cripple a country. They don't need to invade a country. They can just cripple it and exclude it from the global, market. They just destroy you. without firing a shot. So I'll let others speak, but that's kind of my vision.
I think you've kind of helped us to the last sort of segment, which is about whether or not we are swimming against the tide, and perhaps Farouk and Cross can take turns to kind of and by that I mean, are we swimming against the tide of, because I think Jab has kind of outlined what his vision would be, and also kind of agreed that a good part of that should be focusing on ourselves, but also kind of looking out to external influences and how we interact with them. But are we swimming against the tide of the narrative from someone else, which seems to be overwhelmingly taking over our educational spaces? If yes, what do we do about it?
So I'll give this a go. I'm largely aligned with Jabs as regards how to approach things in the large segment. And I just reiterate Yemi's first point, Yemi's important point. Education must start with realizing the self, learning about self, recognition of self, appreciation of self, self-esteem. These are not around facts, they're around narratives and stories and myths you build around yourself. Having done that, then you can engage with society, and then obviously at the geopolitical level, understanding the power of unity, of numbers.
When you start telling Benin children about the Benin Empire, and and
telling Nigerian kids about Nigeria, and African kids about Africa, about that recognition of self, and then unity, and then expand that out. But I hope now, I hope our listeners and all of us here recognize one key point now, which leads us to the final segment, that education can indoctrinate. It can propagandize, right? So therefore, the 54 countries in Africa, so they have our constitutions, our systems, and our educational system designed for us, or modified and given to us by powers that had come to us initially to trade, but afterwards colonized and dominated and subdued us and left us with these systems, with this framework of thought, of looking at the world, of judging ourselves, of measuring ourselves. That's what we've adopted and we've imbibed. Given that in the last 1 hour, we've largely aligned, we are largely aligned that one of the core fundamentals of education is to indoctrinate, to shape, to build.
We're not largely aligned on that.
Apart from Cross, there's a dissenting view. I hope we begin to see that perhaps we've been shaped and indoctrinated in a particular way to suit somebody else's interest. We have to first recognize that, so that when we judge poverty, we judge success, we judge self, we look at our history, our attainment, our development, and we're looking it through the prism and standards and values we've been educated in, but not designed by us.
Like a lot of the media portrayals of Christmas that we see in a place like Nigeria, even though a huge tens of millions of Nigerians are Christians, but the media portrayals is white Christmas and something that can never be their reality at a sort of local level. You see what I mean? And those things almost become a problematic way to engage with life, right?
So back to the question Yemi asked, introducing us to this test segment. I think we farther off from even saying how would we educate ourselves. We need to first of all recognize that we may have been miseducated. That we are all to an extent all indoctrinated, perhaps with thinkings and thoughts of self and of the world and of others that fundamentally sabotage us. We need that recognition, because without that recognition, we throw buffoons without, I'm sorry to use that word, it's not polite, without awareness as leaders. And it is leaders that then have our consent to formulate policy, to modify education, trade, politics, and policy, to even begin to try and address the problem. So there is a need for platforms like this, for conversations in our universities, in our secondary school, in our newspaper joints, under the trees, beer parlors, for people to begin to understand how far gone and how perhaps we are in a very difficult situation. Because to stand a chance, we need conscious leaders. But because somebody else have educated all of us, our parents, and we've taken that framework and educating the next generation, because in real time, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, mainstream media, satellite TV is educating us, in a sense, indoctrinating us, we are fighting a losing battle. Because I use the word losing because the resource gap, the awareness gap, the consciousness gap is huge. And without consciousness, without an awareness that there is indoctrination going on, you stand no chance. So when people like Chairman Mao, when people cut off the internet and say we're cutting off our internet and say they are tyrants or they are dictatorship, there is a consciousness that yes, I can use education to indoctrinate my people, but others are using indoctrination to indoctrinate them.
Yeah.
And to stand a chance, we need to begin to ring fence our young ones. And interestingly, believe it or not, Australia, a Western country in the G7, only this year banned social media for kids under the age of 15. These are stuff we hear from countries like Iran, North Korea, and China.
Yeah.
The US is talking of banning TikTok. They recognize the power of those who educate your population on you.
Yeah.
As a people. So yes, we fight. The challenge is huge. We hope we have leaders. And by leaders, I don't mean the president of Nigeria. Even as parents, we should be able to say, no YouTube, no social media. We already do that at home. You know? So leaders that understand that education can waylay people, can manipulate people, can indoctrinate people, to then institute policies to then protect our people, educate them in self, in history, and then talk about all of the things Jabs talked about. Things to add: trade. Let's trade with each other. Infrastructure. Let's build infrastructure, travel, tourism. These all build into the informal and formal education we talk about. I don't. If I go to Kenya to do business, I'll know Kenyans. I mean, you people may intermarry, and we learn about each other. So we need to build railways, roads, fly, go on holiday. So that's it. It's a tough one, but we need consciousness, and we need to protect our population and young ones.
Sorry, is it a very quick point you've got, Jab? Because
I want to give another. Let me give an example to just further support Farouk's point, all of which I agree with. So, Farouk, you'll be aware, the last Secretary of State, Blinken, he banned a news channel called African Stream. Okay, so these are people challenging those narratives, because a lot of people, when you talk, they kind of assume that the things that we hear, you know, from BBC, you know, CBS, you name it, whichever organization, you know, Fox, all of the people just think that these things are just totally benign. It's not harmful, right? So you now find Africans trying to tell their own story and challenging those narratives. And
they are sanctioned.
Yes. And the whole of USA, the Secretary of State becomes interested, and he thinks, no, we don't like these counter narratives. Banned. He just banned them, right? Now, in Africa, do we actually have a system, a news, I don't know, maybe sort of network that is kind of like pan-African, that discusses African? You may have maybe regional stations or whatever it is to tell our own stories. We don't. Not as a conscious thing for the government, if you know what I mean. There are independent people trying to do stuff here and there, but they just get banned. Like just banned. Do you know what I mean? So Farouk is absolutely right. These things are not harmless. They serve the interest. So if the US and whatever are indoctrinating their own people, that's fine because they want to do that. But at the same time, they are giving us information, because how difficult do you think it is to carry out a color revolution in any country in Africa? It's not hard. You just use the media.
NGOs, media, and people who come on the street.
That's it. That's all you need to do. You know, you can just use that and just make the people rise against their leader.
And then what happens, and what kind of leaders do they make people rise against? Those with consciousness, those wanting to take resource control. Absolutely. They are called tyrants. They are called dictators. And then what happens? A few agents, street protests, popular discontent, topple. And then we never get out of it.
Correct.
Cross, would you take drastic action, or have you changed your mind? I suspect you're patient. You've been very patient, and I suspect that means you're going to fight back.
Well,
no. I think he's reflecting on all of that, and he's thinking there's another perspective.
It's probably having a shift.
Yes,
okay.
He's shifting.
Don't assume anything. In my view, generally speaking, I think I'm going back to the basic conversation that we're having. I think there's fundamentally an issue with education, period. You've been talking about a few more secondary, tertiary issues, ancillary problems or challenges with education. But in my view, I think just in terms of what it is that we determine that we should be talking about and who determines it. And to your point, Jab, that you raised earlier about when we should be training, quote unquote, indoctrinating our children. There's a big problem with that in my mind, because we're indoctrinating them with a lot of different things that we don't necessarily need to. In some circumstances, we are not indoctrinating them with the things that we should. And I'm not saying indoctrination in itself is bad. My own challenge is that education in itself, with the current Western values about what's right or what's wrong, depending on what different areas, Eastern, leftists, whether we're talking about capitalism or communism, etc., all of this kind of stuff, it's not something we should be putting into our educational system, but we are here and we're putting it into our educational system. And I have a problem with that. I have a massive issue with this concept that we are putting thought processes into the generation after us who don't have the cognitive capabilities. Even when they do, they don't have the experiential capabilities. And even when they do not have the historical capabilities or understanding on that context to apply the education to be able to make that determination about what it is that we're telling them to do. But we're in a situation in a world where we come up with these complex issues. We've talked about a lot of complex conversations today. And then we take all of these things, give them to 5-year-olds. This is my issue. My issue is not anything else that we've talked about. My issue is the fact that we put these thoughts into people that aren't ready for it.
What's the alternative?
Is there any country that doesn't do that?
It doesn't matter whether there's any country that does it or not. I don't care.
Any family that doesn't do it. Let's forget about country.
I don't care. My point is not about whether or not, do people do it? Fine. Well, the people that used to eat cows live or fresh or whatever. Or the people who used to do human sacrifices. Oh, well, do you know any family that doesn't do human sacrifices? That doesn't tell me anything. I don't care about that. My point is about whether or not what we're doing is right.
Okay, what's the what's the alternative?
Is it empowerment or is it indoctrination? We're indoctrinating people to do things that are wrong. Are we empowering them? No. Are we indoctrinating them? Yes. We're creating a system that doesn't work for them, but it works for us as a society. And
I think it might be helpful. I think it might be helpful, and I think you've been very excellent at this when you've kind of approached the question in this way in the past. Like remind me the term that you need to copyright. Remind me that term.
Oh, meritocratic autocracy.
That one. So I suspect that you've got a vision for the educational system for African countries, which I think. So why don't you articulate what your vision is? I think if you tell us what should be, I think it'll make. Certainly, I feel I will be able to understand your position a bit better.
I had one before I got into this conversation, but listening to Jab, listening to you, listening to especially Farouk just went into a different world. So I was like, okay, well, actually,
Farouk was trying to balablu you, right?
He carried me all the way. So I was like, okay, actually, I need to think about this a little bit more because Farouk has some very interesting thoughts, and then same with Jab. Jab came with a different angle, so I need to think and articulate my position a little bit more about what it is that I think is actually quite, and it's the same with this because even that conversation we had was based off of the conversations we've had over the episodes, and I think it's a similar thing here. I need to think about and take into cognizance the different opinions that have been raised today, and then maybe there's going to be something that I think about that I might think that's a reasonable way to deal with the situation that we have. But what we're discussing currently, I don't think is enough. I don't think it's sufficient. I don't think it addresses the challenges that we have in the world today. That's my own view.
Okay.
Can I just say something though? So I think
sure.
We've had this conversation quite a lot, which is again with caveats, because even when a child is born, that child is not a blank slate, because they inherited the parents' genes, so the environment they're born into, was the child asphyxiated, was it a difficult birth, and all of those things. So, but in terms of values and culture and religion and all that, when a child is born, it is a blank slate. And we, the parents, then start to nurture the child. You can argue that nurturing is a form of indoctrination, because how you nurture a child in, let's say Guyana or Guyana might be very different to how the Mau do it else. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes you may find that people have completely different cultures, different ways of bringing things. So something might be right here. That particular thing would be abominable in a different part of the world, right? So nurturing, by and large, is itself a form of indoctrination. I know we don't like that language, but it really is a kind of indoctrination. And then the child goes to, primary school. They are taught the same thing. They go to church or to the mosque or whichever religious house, is the same thing. So when a child is born, even though it's a blank slate, but what you become is a summation of everything, all the influences around you, both the ones you can touch, perceptible and imperceptible. And that's what really molds a child. And I think that people who are good educators recognize this, and a society can decide what are our priorities. And they can use that to, after all, the people are the workforce, for instance. So the government or the society can set its priorities, and they can decide how we're going to achieve that. So that's kind of, to me, what education is about. Because education, what is the point of education if you can't solve your own problems? And that's kind of the problem that we have in Africa. Look, we've got people who are highly educated. Like, if you talk about people say Nigerians have, like, we're the most educated.
We've got the most papers, you mean?
Okay. So education is not intelligence. They are not. They are having, like, 2, 3, 4
degrees. We're educated. We had different, corporations, and with reason, all of that. But look at our country. We can't even solve a problem like malaria, right? Which all of Africa and lots of other issues. We can't solve those
Correct,
problems.
correct,
Why is that?
correct me if I'm wrong. Most state capitals wouldn't have a functioning public sewage system, or
Okay, guys.
whatever the
Yes, we
system
have
is.
yes, yet we have all of this engineers. So something is missing, and I think part of this thing is this dislocation. We do not understand what education is about.
I think the other thing to just add from my point of view is that education is not only, as Cross has alluded, towards being able to think critically. It's part of it, but education is also to make you, if you like, battle ready. So most of the decisions we make in life and how we behave and how we respond, we don't think about them critically. They become automatic. And we all know this for a fact. That's why people can almost make skits and jokes about, oh, this is how Italian people behave in a restaurant versus this is how French people, because we can see that there's an acculturation that comes with, and all of this becomes, so you learn it, but then it becomes automatic behavior, right? And so you cannot groom a society. Again, I use that word in its original form. I'm talking about education and culture when I say groom. So you cannot groom a people to be always critically thinking about everything. No, they're what you call values. They become in many
Ingrained.
cases or ingrained. They become automatic responses. You know how people are going to
So
respond, right?
things like the term patriotic Nigerian.
Yes. You don't think
What,
about
what does
patriotism.
that mean? Yeah.
It becomes an attitude, right? That is
Yep.
ingrained,
I
right?
like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
a way
So
of life.
yeah, so and this is part of what education aims at. I'm not saying that's all it aims at. That clearly is one of its aims, where you're trying to build automatic behaviors that has been kind of generally agreed to be helpful, beneficial, at least to your group. And that's what we do as families as well. You basically raise children to have these automatic behaviors, to be able to cope with routines, to be able to get up at whatever time in the morning and get ready for school. And you don't want them critically thinking whether it's okay to go to school.
Exactly.
No.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the thing is, obviously, like, some nations, what they've also done is that they've told themselves a mythology, a myth, which is again to try and galvanize a society, because again,
Absolutely.
education is about where are we going, how can we
Well,
achieve
how
that.
are you guys proving my point? Oh my God! Wow.
No, we're
Sorry,
not
go on.
proving your point. We both agree. So we both agree on what we disagree on. So we understand what you're saying. I don't think we're proving your point. I think we understand what you're saying, but kind of are not quite aligned on the utility.
There you are. You're 100% aligned right now. Well, sorry, carry on.
No, you jump in if you want. I think I've kind of made my point.
No, but to me, it's a concept about we are changing what it is that we consider to be education. We shift it and we turn it into something that's actually quite useful to us as a people, because we understand that education is not something that is fixed. It's not something that's necessarily true. It's something that we decide that is helpful and useful to our progeny, and we keep doing that. Sorry.
Yeah, utility is so pandering to utility is a virtue. If something is useful, you have to consider whether or not you should do it. So you don't only do what is true. So again, this is where is it true that you should love your child? Who knows? But it's got utility, right? And most of us will not debate that. Okay, it's got utility. Go for it, right? Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't think everything sort of stands or falls on the basis of whether it's true or not. I think life is more sort of
Not that simple.
Yeah. It's not about just what's true or not true. You can't live your life on that basis. No one does, in fact.
Yeah, and I agree also, education isn't a fixed thing. You adapt it, you review it, things that are less important as the society has evolved, they can go. And so it's, I think it evolves as well. It's a process, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should we move to last thoughts then?
Absolutely. Last thought. So, who wants to go first? Shall I? I could do. I'd say,
All right.
I think we've had a great conversation. I've enjoyed all the perspectives. I kind of end by saying education to me. I think the dichotomy between whether it's a form of empowerment or indoctrination just seems a little bit artificial. I think what you find in whatever you call good education is a mix of both. I think often with a shift in balance. So I think often at the earlier stages, what you get is more, perhaps a little bit more indoctrination and critical thinking. But then as people progress, the balance kind of shifts, but it never really completely eliminates any part of it. And I think there's nothing to be ashamed of in saying, yeah, a lot of what we call education is indoctrination. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, I do not see an alternative. I think, you've got to first kind of galvanize people, bring people together before you then begin to critique and sort of argue about what got utility or what doesn't. You first all got to be around the table. And how do you get around the table? Values, shared stories, myths, archetypes, which they don't exist. You create them. They're sort of the creations of our minds, effectively. They're products of our imagination, right? Which we then pass on, and I think we're all aware of this. And so that's my thoughts, really. I think critical thinking is crucial. How do we, solve life's big problems, medical, societal, structural engineering without critical thinking? We need critical thinking. But how do we even get around the table to agree on pulling resources together to do this if we don't tell each other these stories that are just products of our imagination? So it seems to me that we're talking about two sides of a coin. And with regards to how we do this as Africans, again, I think we need to look inwards, and I think we need to really understand, as has been said very widely, that we may be swimming against the tide. Resource-wise, we're being drowned out by the stories that other people tell themselves, and which works for them, but which may not work for us. And I think that's the challenge for African leaders, to be able to come up against the tide with a bespoke education for the African child that recognizes and places value on the uniqueness of the African circumstances, but also tailors critical thinking towards uniquely African problems. Thank you. Jab?
Okay, so I think building on from what you've said, I don't want to repeat any of the important points that you've made. I think that I actually quite like this quote from John Henrik Clark. He's somebody that I admire quite a lot. He's an African American educator who is late now, and he said. So I'm just going to read here. He said, "To control the people, you must first control what they think about themselves and how they regard their history and culture. And when your conqueror makes you ashamed of your culture and your history, he needs no prison walls and no chains to hold you." So why am I quoting this? Because we know about our history as Africans, the history of slave trade, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. We are in a competitive global world that seeks to put us right at the bottom of the chain to be able to extract value. And this system is being upheld with guns and bombs and nuclear weapons. How should we educate an African child? I think the people who can do all of this to you and put you in chain and put you and maintain you at the bottom of the food chain with guns and bombs and nuclear weapons, if you leave your education to them, they are going to seek to make sure that you remain in exactly the same way that you are. So to educate, if you have that understanding, immediately you start to see that educating the African or African child is about liberating him from this mental bondage and setting him free so that he can unleash the power that is within him. And to me, the path to do that is a pan-African vision for Africa, and we need economic integration, we need military integration, political integration, we need to deploy nuclear deterrence to protect whatever development we have achieved. Thank you.
Great. Farouk, final words, please. Final thoughts, I should say.
Well summarized by Yemi and Jabs. Nothing to add. Thank you for listening.
Cross, you've got both final or last thoughts and the final word.
So there's a couple of things. One is the idea that somehow education can be, manipulated, twisted, tweaked to fit what we want it to be. I 100% do not think that can ever be the case. I think that the way education is designed to proliferate the zeitgeist. I don't like using that word because that word has been bastardized in the current world that we exist within. But the zeitgeist at the moment is turning into something where it's quite right wing, to the point where I'm not necessarily certain that I believe that that's the case, but I do agree with quite a lot of the things and a lot of the views around how people look at education. There are problematic issues with how we view education today. Education is currently seen as either left wing or extremely right wing. Whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Europe or whether you're in America, doesn't matter where you're listening to this from. Recently, we've had people from all over the world listening to the podcast. Thank you very much for listening to that. But it doesn't change the fact that education is still all about people being told one of two things. Are you being empowered or are you being indoctrinated? I personally think that the vast majority of people are being indoctrinated. They're being told what they should think is correct. They're being taught to accept a specific kind of lifestyle as true without necessarily understanding whether or not this empowers them to make decisions that they should make. This is my view. This is my own personal assessment about the educational system. And I'm saying this as someone with a master's degree. And we're all highly educated here. We all understand the educational system. When I look at this, all I see is a system that gives people the opportunity to progress within the system that has propagated itself. I think that we don't know what we're talking about. We don't understand the world that we exist within, and we try to find fillers. We need to change this concept. We need to find ways of being able to objectively assess whether or not we're progressing, whether or not we have knowledge, whether or not we're making a difference against what we do. And that's not what we have right now. Education, as I see it, is a scam. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of space, it's a waste of people's financial resources, whether it's your parents that are paying for it, whether it's you that's saving your money to pay for it, or whether it's an investment in terms of you taking a loan. I think that one day we'll get to a position where people are going to look at the world and education is going to be about traditionalism. We're going to go back to where we were 2, 3, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, where we're going to look at what worked and we're going to take that and keep moving that forward. At the moment, what works is what's fancy. That's my take.
Fascinating. I think we might have to do some of this again at some point because I suspect there's still more to come from Cross. I don't think you had enough time to kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty of your ideas. I sense that there's more there that hasn't really, there's just been lost because of time. But we've run out of time now.
We ambushed him for today, so let him gather his thoughts and come back.
Yeah, that's a fair way to describe what happened. So I think you were kind of ambushed, and so perhaps you'd get the opportunity on this topic to share your ideas a bit more in detail. But thanks everyone for joining us, and again, thanks Jab, Cross, Farouk. It's been fascinating. Let's do this again next week, same time.
Thank you.
Signing out. Misaligned.
Right.